Hi everyone. This is the voice behind the noise. And I am Myron. The United States and other Western politicians and media have frequently made noises in public opinion, claiming that Russia has sent a request to China to support weapons and that China has basically agreed to provide support to Russia. Officials from the White House and intelligence agencies of the United States also regarded this false information as intelligence and shared it with allies in Europe. And many American politicians, in turn, took these so-called exclusive intelligence and put pressure on China to ask China not to provide military support to Russia. Well, Americans have always been good at this trick. But the question is, does Russia really need China's weapons? Well, as for logistical supplied vehicles and military rations, in fact, Russia, as a military power, has sufficient reserves. Now that Russia has decided to launch a special military operation, it should be a prudent decision made after careful consideration and multifaceted assessment. Do not fight unprepared battles, the Russians still understand this truth. Moreover, in the production of strategic materials, Russia has a very solid foundation and a good tradition. Russia has its own supply system for weapons and equipment, and it has a completely independent industrial chain. At present, the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine that we have seen is actually only a low-intensity military conflict. The consumption of weapons and equipment is not very large, and Russia is also clearing its inventory. This will not affect Russia's actual weapons and equipment supply capabilities, including equipment support capabilities. Therefore, there is absolutely no need to purchase weapons and equipment from China. Instead, what we've seen is that the US has been giving Ukraine a massive and steady stream of military assistance in this conflict. US military aid has always been its tradition, that is, to provide various military aids to the side that it supports to against the other side. In this way, the United States interferes in the internal affairs of other countries to achieve the purpose of fostering its own agents. Why is the US military aid to Ukraine so large? Well, it is because the longer Russian troops stay in Ukraine, the better it is in US interests. The United States hopes to use this military conflict to hold back Russia, or even bring down Russia. The normal military cooperation between China and Russia is relatively extensive, such as joint military exercises and joint strikes against the three forces, which are all important military cooperation. China and Russia are also jointly developing large aircraft, which is a cooperation between China and Russia in the field of science and technology. Therefore, there is still a lot of military cooperation between China and Russia, but this is completely different from China's military assistance to Russia. Through the above analysis, we can see that China's decision to provide military support to Russia exaggerated by the US and Western media is completely false news. This Russian-Ukrainian conflict has offered a new perspective into modern warfare, that is, in the information age, especially with the oversupply of information. Public opinion warfare has become an increasingly important front. One of the problems exposed by the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is that in the war of public opinion, the West frequently uses false and misleading news to achieve its own goals. Okay, that's all for today, see you in the next video.